Hello and welcome back to Off the Post. In today's episode, I'll be discussing how Newcastle end their 5 winless streak in the Premier League. But before that, as always, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very much appreciated, and it goes a long way to help me build a small community on my channel. We've recently just hit 312 subscribers. We're well on our way to getting 500 subscribers. Can we go and smash it? Hopefully we can. Just want to say a massive thank you for the recent support on our most recent episodes, all the likes and the comments on social media as well. Definitely going to notice. I just want to say a massive thank you really for the overall support. But let's get straight into the episode, shall we? Now, Newcastle beat Brighton 3-1 at the weekend, and this was an amazing result because they ended their 5 winless streak in the Premier League. Honestly, this season, Newcastle really have been up and down, haven't they? Really, really inconsistent, and it just goes to show, it's a bit of a underperforming season for Eddie Howe and his side, just because, ever since Eddie Howe took over for the Newcastle job, okay, they've always been challenging for those top six positions, Champions League football. They won the Carabao Cup last season. They've been absolutely amazing, but for whatever reason it is, Newcastle have just been honestly a little bit terrible this season. It actually have been. Don't get me wrong, right? At the start of the summer transfer window, we was thinking they was going to push on, make some great signings, and they were going to elevate the side even further. But that just hasn't been the case, hasn't it? They've actually, when you look at the four main signings from that summer transfer window, none of them are starters. In the likes of Walter Maida, Wissa, Jacob Ramsey, Anthony Nanga, those main four players are nowhere to be seen in that starting lineup. It just makes no sense, does it? You know, when we think about that, like best 11 side for Newcastle, that's just none of those four players actually make the squad. And a lot of people have been saying, right, it's been actually one of the worst transfer windows for Newcastle. Newcastle have had the worst transfer window, and I almost have to agree with them, just because, you know, those signing two strikers in Walter and Wissa, it's sort of that same conversation where, do you actually need two strikers? Why would you need them if you only play one up front? It makes no sense, and don't get me wrong, Walter did look good at the start of the season. He was scoring a few goals. He had a good, like, 10-game period, if you like, but he sort of quickly dropped off. And then Wizza, honestly, I think he's probably one of the worst signings of the whole transfer window, just because, obviously had a great season for Brentford last season. Newcastle spent 50 million on him, 50 million to sort of almost use him to replace Alexander Isak. And he's been injured, he's not played, he's come off the bench for the majority of his matches, and he just hasn't been good enough. He hasn't made an impact, he hasn't been effective in those games. Don't get me wrong, he's had a few assists, he's had a few half chances where he probably should have scored a few more goals, especially in this game. He skied one over the bar at, like, I think it was 2-1 at this point. He skied one over the bar, so it didn't really matter too much because obviously they did go on and win the game. But Wizard for 15 million, when you already brought Baltimore, I'm pretty sure at that point. Just what is the point? What is the point of that signing? And you got to think to yourself as well, with the likes of William Osula, okay, sort of coming in the back half of the season, in the second half of the season, in the last couple of weeks, in the last couple of months, he's sort of outperforming both of those players. So it's really good to see sort of him, finally getting his breakthrough in that Newcastle side, because he's been at the team now for, like, what, 2 seasons, 3 seasons potentially, the Brazilian striker. So it's sort of good to see him sort of breaking into his own, getting more game time, getting a few more minutes under his belt, and actually starting scoring some goals. William Osula, and for me, that's what he definitely did in that first goal. For that first goal, okay, don't get me wrong. Obviously, let's just talk about the first goal. Why not? William Sula scored it in the 12th minute, okay, and he probably wouldn't have scored the easiest goal of his life, okay. That probably was one of the easiest goals of his life. The Brighton goalkeeper, sorry, the Brighton goalkeeper for Bruggen, okay, he came rushing out onto the box to sort of try and win the ball off the Newcastle winger, okay, but he absolutely mistimes his challenge, and then the Newcastle winger sort of just runs past him, okay, takes the ball past him, takes one nice little touch, and then crosses it straight to the Brazilian striker, and he's literally with an open goal, okay, and he just heads it home like 5 yards out. He wouldn't find an easier chance in his life, like I've just mentioned. Honestly, William Sula again, he's one of these strikers that he's very good at holding the ball, isn't he? He's very good bringing in players into play. He's got a big aerial threat. For me, I do like him. He can run him in behind as well. He's got a bit of pace about him. He's not the fastest of players, is he? But he's still got a little bit about him, and he's starting to find his form, find his feet in the Premier League. Maybe he can become that starting striker that Newcastle do need. But then again, I do want to see Fultamada. I do want to see Wizza. But I'm just not too sure, because at the moment, there's been a lot of rumours that Fultamada might actually leave the club. Might go back to Germany. Maybe he's a little bit homesick. We don't know if that's true or not. We'll have to wait till the summer. But then, maybe William Osula will be battling out with the likes of Wizza next season. But anyways, moving over to the second goal, obviously it was scored by Dan Burn in the 24th minute. Lovely, lovely cross from Bruno Guimaraes from a corner, of course. And obviously it's going to be the main person in the box, 6'5", 6'6", whatever this guy is, Dan Burn. The centre back leaps up over everybody, leaps and bounds over all the other, Brighton defenders, midfielders, and he's absolutely has a bullet header in the right side of the post, okay, in the right side corner, and again for Bruggen, he couldn't do anything about it. I feel like he maybe just misreads it a little bit, and he's too far in the middle of the goal because he couldn't get his hands to it. Unfortunately for him. And at this point, 2-0, you got to think to yourself, pretty much game over. Brighton didn't really look like they was going to get back into the game. They didn't look like scoring at all. Don't get me wrong, they had a few half chances here and there, but nothing really of note. There was a good chance with a. There was a good chance with the Greek striker. He did like an acrobatic sort of, overhead kick, if you like, but the goalkeeper did save it, Nick Pope. So it was a bit of a weird one. For me, in this game, you almost got to think to yourself, I feel like this game, don't get me wrong, okay, Brighton did sort of get back into the game in the 60th minute from Jack Hinchelwood, okay, for me, Jack Hinchelwood is one of their star youngsters in the team, isn't he, at the moment. He scored a few goals this season. Every time I, do a video on Brighton, I feel like he does put in a good performance overall. And I could definitely see him pushing onto a new team in like maybe a year or two to the side. Maybe he's the next £100 million player like Brighton sell him on to be, or whatever. You know what I mean? Do you know what I'm saying? But Jack Hinchelwood anyway. Nice little combination. 1-2s between him and Danny Welbeck. Obviously, Jack Hinchelwood is in the box now. Runs onto the ball, and he just smashes it straight past Nick Pope in goal. He could not do anything about Nick Pope in this game. And for me, when we talk about goalkeepers in this game, they were making a lot of errors, weren't they? Obviously, for Bruggen in the first half with the first goal, okay, in the 12th minute, and then Nick Pope had that one opportunity where the Brighton attackers were sort of pressing him, and obviously sort of just tries to boot the ball up to the up. Nick Pope tries to boot the ball away from the Brighton defenders, okay, up the pitch, of course, and then he sort of just hits off the Brighton player, and the ball literally goes backwards and bounces off the Newcastle post, okay. Honestly, he could have scored an own goal at this point. It was really weird to see, but anyways, let's just finish it off. Talk about the third goal, okay. Obviously, Harvey Barnes scored that in the 90th plus 6th minute, pretty much end of the game, okay. Obviously, nice little counter attack. Wizard is on the left hand side. He sort of picks up the ball on the left hand side, runs into the box. He tries to go around the keeper, but then he sort of just lays it off to Harvey Barnes instead. And then he just takes 1 or 2 touches and just curls it round the goalkeeper. Okay, easy as you like again for Harvey Barnes. Harvey Barnes has scored 15 goals and got 5 assists this season in all competitions, so he is good for a goal. He does score a lot of goals for Newcastle, and he's very important. He's very effective, isn't he? Whether that's coming off the bench or starting. For me, I do prefer him to an Anthony Gordon, just because, for me, I feel like Anthony Gordon just doesn't perform in those lesser games. Let's say this Brighton game, for example, I don't think he's going to be scoring in these games. He's more of a big-time-ish player, if you like, where he gets himself up for those big games, big occasions, but he doesn't really do it for those lesser sides. Maybe, let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with that fact. But if we just end the video now talking about, the whole Eddie Howe situation, with fans sort of debating whether or not he should be, potentially, leaving at the end of the season, or should get sacked, or whatever you want to call it. It's a bit of a tricky one, because it has been an inconsistent season for Newcastle. They've not really, they've been underperforming, haven't they? So from that point of view, a lot of, Newcastle fans have been asking questions online whether or not someone like Areola, like the Bournemouth manager Areola, should potentially take the job in front of him, because they're saying to themselves, maybe Eddie Howe can't take Newcastle to that next level. And what is the next level? It's sort of, always trying to compete in those top six positions, Champions League football. And don't get me wrong, he's been doing it for 3 or 4 seasons. But again, Newcastle, Aston Villa, they just don't have that same exposure. They don't have that same revenue, if you like, to sort of reinvest it back into their squad. They don't make the same amount of money as the top six, as the Manchester Uniteds, Chelsea's, Arsenal's, Liverpool's, to sort of be able to break into that top six, if you like. It's that same old debate, isn't it? Where these sides they get so far, don't they? The Newcastles, the Aston Villas, the Brentfords of the world, the Crystal Palaces. They do really well to sort of get Europa League football, Champions League football for a season or two, but to try and break into that side, top six, if you like, the big six, it's just too difficult these days. There's too much money in football, but where you don't, but you just can't reinvest it. Maybe I might only do some more research into it, but let me know in the comments down below why that actually does happen. But yeah, let's end the video now with some questions, okay? How do you feel about Newcastle ending their 5 winless streak in the Premier League? How do you feel about Eddie Howe? Should he be sacked at the end of the season, or does he deserve another year in charge? Who could replace him? Would you like to see the Bournemouth manager Iriola in charge? He's one of the names that's been linked to the job, if you like, or the Newcastle fans have sort of, seen that he's available, or at least anyways. How do we feel about, obviously, the players in this game against Brighton? William Osula. How do we feel about Dan Burn, Harvey Barnes? Is he better than Anthony Gordon? How do you feel about Brighton? What are they going to be doing? Obviously, they're comfortably sitting in 7th place, potentially getting, Conference League football, so that could be good for their season. Even Europa League football could be good as well, like they have done in previous seasons. But yeah, before that, as always, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very much appreciated. It goes a long way helping me build a small community on my channel. Recently, just hit 312 subscribers. One on our way to getting 500. Can we go and smash it? Hopefully, we can. Just want to say a massive thank you for the recent support on our most recent episodes, all the likes and the comments on social media. Definitely doesn't go unnoticed. And I just want to say a massive thank you, really. And I really do hope you have a good rest of your day. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.